Inside the walls of Imperial Japan's most secret laboratory, a celebrated doctor transformed human suffering into something he called progress. Dr. Shiro Ishii, once hailed as a medical prodigy, convinced his nation that agony unlocked scientific truth, orchestrating frostbite experiments that blurred the line between research and inhumanity. What twists a brilliant mind into believing that data is worth any price? And how did the journey into Unit 731 begin? Shibayama in Chiba Prefecture, Japan, was the birthplace of Shiro Ishii on June 25, 1892. His family were landowners with deep roots in the region, and they valued education and ambition as pathways to greater status. From his earliest school days, Ishii stood out for his sharp intellect and relentless drive. Teachers noted his remarkable memory and appetite for challenge, traits that set him apart from his peers and won him early admiration. By adolescence, Ishii's reputation as a prodigy had spread beyond his village. He devoured textbooks, solved complex problems for classmates, and sought every opportunity to distinguish himself. His academic record opened doors to Kyoto Imperial University, one of the most prestigious institutions in Japan at the time. Admission to the medical department was fiercely competitive, but Ishii's exam scores and recommendations from local officials secured his place. At Kyoto, Ishii's intensity only deepened. He published early research on infectious diseases and impressed faculty with his technical skill in bacteriology. Professors described him as tireless, often working in the laboratory long after others had gone home. His mentor, Ren Kimura, recalled Ishii's habit of commandeering lab equipment late at night, leaving behind a trail of notes and half-finished experiments. He was known for his disregard for routine and his willingness to challenge established ideas, sometimes clashing with older students and faculty over methods and priorities. Ishii graduated in December 1920 at age 28, earning high honors. His academic file listed him among the top of his class, a distinction that brought both recognition and expectation. The curriculum at Kyoto Imperial University in those years focused on technical mastery. Formal instruction in medical ethics was absent. Instead, students were encouraged to pursue discovery and national service, with little discussion of the boundaries between research and responsibility. Even as a young man, Ishii's ambition was clear. He cultivated relationships with influential professors and sought the company of army officers who visited the university. Those who knew him described a confidence bordering on arrogance, and a belief that exceptional ability justified exceptional privilege. This sense of standing apart, of being destined for greater things, would shape the path he followed after graduation, as he stepped from the university into the world of military medicine. In January 1921, just weeks after his graduation, Shiro Ishii accepted a commission as surgeon first class. The uniform brought new authority and a broader stage for his ambitions. Early personnel files describe a young officer brimming with confidence, quick to challenge superiors, and unafraid to promote his own ideas. Ishii's technical skill in bacteriology caught the attention of senior medical officers, but it was his willingness to question boundaries that set him apart. He pushed for advanced laboratory work, arguing in memos that infectious disease could be harnessed as a weapon. While most of his peers focused on hygiene and treatment, Ishii was already lobbying for the study of pathogens as strategic tools. Army mentors, including Koizumi Chikahiko, a future health minister, became patrons. They were impressed by Ishii's intellect and his bold proposals. Behind closed doors, he spoke of the West's advances in biological warfare, warning that Japan must not fall behind. His early reports to superiors stressed the potential of bacteria to decide battles, not just save lives. This was more than scientific curiosity. Ishii saw himself as a pioneer, uniquely qualified to lead Japan into a new era of military science. His colleagues noted the arrogance that came with this sense of purpose. Ishii dismissed objections as narrow-minded, insisting that only those with vision could appreciate the true power of medical research. He cultivated relationships with officers at the Tokyo Army Medical School, trading favors and information to secure access to equipment and funding. By 1922, Ishii had transferred to the school's research division, where he continued to blur the lines between medicine and militarism. His growing network of supporters shielded him from criticism and allowed him to bypass traditional hierarchies. Personnel evaluations from these years describe a man who worked relentlessly, but also one who bent rules and tested limits. Ishii's early army career laid the groundwork for what would follow: a merger of scientific ambition and nationalistic fervor, fueled by a belief in his own exceptionalism. The seeds of his persuasive power and disregard for conventional ethics were already taking root, setting the stage for the unprecedented experiments he would soon propose. On August 6, 1936, behind closed doors at Army headquarters in Tokyo, the air was thick with unease. Shiro Ishii, by then a rising star within the military medical corps, stood before a room of the most powerful generals in Imperial Japan. Hideki Tojo, then Vice Minister of War, sat among them, silent and watchful, his reputation for discipline well known. Ishii laid out his proposal in crisp detail. Japan's future, he said, depended on mastery of biological warfare, and the only way forward was through unrestricted human experimentation. He warned that Western nations were already advancing in this forbidden science. If Japan hesitated, he argued, it would fall behind, vulnerable to enemies who would show no mercy. Meeting minutes from that day record Ishii's relentless logic. He described pathogens as the next revolution in warfare, more decisive than bullets or bombs. His language was precise, but every word pressed on the general's fear of national decline. Ishii insisted that the Geneva Protocol's ban on bacteriological weapons proved their effectiveness. He spoke of a new kind of research facility that would require absolute secrecy and total freedom from legal and ethical restraint. The plan was not just ambitious, it was audacious. Human subjects, he declared, were essential. Only real suffering could yield answers to the questions that would decide the fate of empires. Some generals hesitated. The risks were obvious, and the moral cost lingered unspoken. Ishii pressed harder, invoking the emperor's destiny and the duty of every officer to ensure Japan's survival. He promised results, new weapons, new defenses, knowledge that could not be matched by any rival. Tojo, according to later testimony, showed discomfort but did not object. The fear Ishii stoked The specter of Western bioweapons, the threat to national honor, overpowered any lingering doubts. The decision was swift. Funding and full authority were granted. The military's highest ranks gave Ishii everything he needed: land in Manchuria, a blank check for construction, and the power to recruit staff from across the empire. Within weeks, Ishii's vision moved from theory to reality. Orders were issued for the creation of the Epidemic Prevention and Water Supply Unit, soon to be known as Unit 731. The project was no longer a private obsession. It became a sanctioned arm of the Japanese war machine, backed by the very men charged with defending the nation. The boundaries between science and cruelty, between research and atrocity, faded into the shadows of that briefing room. Language was changed to suit purpose. Victims would be renamed, categorized, and treated as data. Secrecy and obedience replaced oversight and conscience. What began as a proposal on paper was transformed into an institution where human agony was not only permitted, it was presented as necessary. Ishii had convinced the guardians of Japan's future that suffering could be a tool of statecraft, that answers would be found only through pain. That conviction, and the power that backed it, set the stage for the experiments that would follow, and for the moral collapse that allowed them to proceed. Inside the walls of Pingfong, language became a tool for erasing empathy. Staff meetings and memos referred to living prisoners as logs, using the Japanese word maruta. This term did more than hide the truth. It turned men, women, and children into units of material, objects to be counted, moved, and disposed of. Orders for log shipments appeared in daily schedules, blending seamlessly with requests for medical supplies or fuel. In the records, the fate of a person was reduced to a line item: 1 log delivered, 1 log processed, 1 log disposed. The choice to use particular words created distance from the harm being done. By substituting logs for prisoners or subjects, the staff created distance between their actions and the suffering they caused. This bureaucratic language allowed doctors, guards, and clerks to perform their roles without confronting the reality behind the numbers. The process echoed what psychologist Albert Bandura later described as moral disengagement, how people use euphemisms and official jargon to mask cruelty, making it easier to obey orders that would otherwise be unthinkable. Within Unit 731, the chain of command promoted rigid obedience. Orders flowed from the top, and questioning them was almost unthinkable. The imperial military culture prized obedience above all else. Even those who felt unease learned to suppress it, reassured by the language of necessity and the authority of their superiors. Laboratory technicians and junior officers recorded data, performed procedures, and filed reports, each step framed as routine, each victim a statistic. Social rituals reinforced a sense of belonging. Staff joked about the number of logs processed, using dark humor to relieve tension and signal belonging. The daily repetition of these terms, the constant reminders that they were serving a higher purpose, dulled individual responsibility. Psychologists like Nick Haslam have described this as mechanistic dehumanization, turning people into objects, stripping them of identity and agency. The result was a system where atrocity became ordinary. The language of logs and quotas, the strict hierarchy, and the culture of obedience worked together to create an environment where cruelty was normalized. The boundaries between science and violence faded, sustained by words that made the unimaginable routine. Inside the laboratories at Pingfong, The frostbite experiments followed a strict and chilling routine. Each step was recorded in lab notebooks with a precision that left no room for doubt about intent. Technicians began by selecting a prisoner, often a healthy adult, sometimes a child, then stripping them of clothing and documenting their weight, age, and baseline temperature. The subject's arm or leg was submerged in a bath of ice water, with the water temperature and air humidity logged to the decimal. Some protocols called for exposure outdoors, arms outstretched in the sub-zero wind, while others required the limb to be pressed against blocks of ice, skin to ice, hour after hour. Measurement tools lined the benches: mercury thermometers, stopwatch timers, and metal rods used to tap the frozen limb. The sound of the percussion test, a hollow, brittle knock, signaled that the tissue beneath the skin had solidified. Lab notes from a January 1941 trial describe the moment in clinical terms. Percussive resonance was confirmed. Skin temperature was -6 degrees Celsius. Thaw interval was initiated. Photographic plates, some of which survived the war, captured the progression: pale skin, waxy and rigid, then blackening as circulation failed. Variables were methodically altered from one experiment to the next. The technicians changed the length of exposure, the salt content of the water, even the subject's diet in the days before testing. Some prisoners were forced to exercise before the procedure. Others were deprived of food or sleep. These details were entered into tables and cross-referenced with the victim's response to freezing and thawing. Variables were treated as the chief concern. After the limb was judged fully frozen, staff used friction, hot water, or direct body heat to rewarm the tissue, taking notes on pain response, swelling, and the speed of color returning to the skin. Observers recorded screaming and withdrawal as data points. Pain was cataloged alongside temperature and time. The process was designed to isolate cause and effect, to extract data points from suffering. Every stage was governed by protocol, from the initial selection to the final autopsy. Lab notebooks tracked the smallest deviations, and photographic records provided visual proof of each outcome. For the technicians, the experiment was a matter of procedure and measurement, a series of numbers, images, and observations to be filed away for review. Human life in this system became a variable to control, a data set to be completed. Inside the laboratories of Unit 731, the work of doctors and technicians was shaped by more than protocols and equipment. The transformation from healer to perpetrator unfolded in quiet, systematic ways. Medical staff recorded every detail: temperature, time, tissue response. Yet the act of writing data became a shield separating their professional identity from the suffering in front of them. This psychological split, what psychiatrist Robert J. Lifton later called doubling, allowed individuals to function as meticulous scientists in one moment and as agents of cruelty in the next. Official records and post-war testimony reveal how staff justified their roles. Many described themselves as instruments of national policy, responsible only for the accuracy of their observations, not the fate of their subjects. Orders from superiors and the language of necessity framed every procedure as a duty. The daily repetition of tasks, surrounded by colleagues who shared the same routines, dulled the sense of individual responsibility. Albert Bandura's research on moral disengagement explains how this happens. Euphemistic language, group pressure, and the diffusion of responsibility make it possible for ordinary people to participate in extraordinary harm. Trial transcripts from the Khabarovsk proceedings highlight the absence of open dissent among senior medical staff. When questioned, most described their work as scientific, not criminal. Some pointed to the use of terms like logs or specimens as evidence that they did not see their victims as people. Others insisted that they were following orders, a defense echoed in many atrocity-producing systems. The rigid hierarchy of the imperial military left little space for protest. Even those who felt discomfort learned to suppress it, relying on routine and the approval of superiors to quiet their doubts. There are hints, in scattered testimony, of psychological strain among lower-ranking staff. Some reported nightmares, drinking to cope, or requesting transfers to less brutal assignments. But documented acts of refusal were rare. The case of a junior technician quietly declining to observe a frostbite procedure stands out as an exception, an action that led not to reform, but to reassignment or isolation. Most staff adapted, compartmentalizing their roles, convinced that their work served a higher purpose. The result was a culture where empathy was not just absent, but actively unwelcome. A laboratory where science and suffering became indistinguishable, and where the line between doctor and perpetrator faded into routine. Inside Unit 731, doctrine was never a matter of secret handshakes or slogans on the walls. Philosophy formed in official memos, in justifications scribbled in margins, and in routines that governed every act. In the surviving records, Ishii's worldview is not announced in a single phrase. It is woven through his instructions to staff and his directives to superiors. In an internal memorandum circulated among senior officers in early 1941, Ishii wrote that progress in medical science demands observation of natural processes in their purest form, unclouded by sentiment or interference. He insisted that only by witnessing the full arc of disease, injury, and death could medicine advance beyond limits set by tradition. These were not the words of a detached academic. They were a direct challenge to peacetime ethics, a call to embrace suffering as a tool for discovery. The language of necessity ran through every order. Staff were reminded that the demands of war require new knowledge, and new knowledge comes only through sacrifice. In one directive, Ishii outlined the rationale for human experimentation. He argued that no animal model can provide data of value for the Imperial Army's needs. The only valid results are those obtained from the human body under real conditions. This logic, repeated in reports and echoed by subordinates, became the program's unwritten law. Suffering was not an unfortunate byproduct. It was the method, the means, and the measure of success. Ishii's guidance to his physicians was stark. In a protocol update in 1942, he warned not to be swayed by emotion. The subject was described as a vessel for knowledge. The duty, he said, was to observe, record, and learn. Those words stripped away the last traces of empathy, leaving only the cold calculus of cause and effect. In the controlled environment of ping-pong, the value of a life was measured in data points, tissue samples, and the clarity of a death charted from start to finish. The absence of a formal motto did not mean the absence of conviction. Ishii's staff understood the message encoded in every memo and every meeting. Discovery justified all. The ritual language of science, observation, documentation, analysis, became a shield against doubt. As long as the outcome served the greater goal, no act was off limits. The philosophy of Unit 731 was not a matter of personal belief, it was institutional doctrine. It inverted the meaning of progress, and it made agony its engine. Philosophers and psychologists have long tried to explain how ordinary people become agents of horror when systems demand it. Hannah Arendt, observing the trial of Adolf Eichmann, described evil not as the product of monsters, but as the outcome of unthinking routine, what she called the banality of evil. In the corridors of Unit 731, this idea found a chilling echo. Here, the pursuit of knowledge was redefined as a technical problem, stripped of values and conscience. Max Weber called this instrumental rationality, a world where only the outcome matters and the means become invisible, no matter how brutal. Ishii's personnel files, filled with performance reviews and promotion notices, paint a portrait of a man rewarded for efficiency, not empathy. His ability to deliver results, charts, tissue samples, protocols, mattered more than the human cost. The culture of the Japanese military, with its rigid hierarchy and emphasis on obedience, amplified these tendencies. Orders flowed downward, and questioning them could mean isolation or reassignment. The system itself demanded compliance, and those who hesitated found themselves pushed aside. Laboratory records and staff rosters show that nearly every member of Unit 731 advanced in rank or responsibility during their tenure, a pattern that reinforced the logic of obedience and technical accomplishment. Within this machinery, the individual became an implement of policy, and the suffering of victims was rendered invisible by the language of science. Philosophers like Arendt and Weber would later argue that such environments do not require sadists at the helm, only functionaries who follow procedure, convinced that their small part is justified by the promise of progress. Ishii's own claims to expertise rested on a foundation of myth. He reported to superiors that he had studied Western bioweapons programs in the United States and Canada during a supposed tour between 1928 and 1930. Post-war investigations found no evidence of these visits. The travel was a fabrication, designed to inflate his authority and silence doubters. Yet the system accepted his word, and the absence of oversight allowed his ambitions to proceed unchecked. The rationalizations that sustained Unit 731 were not unique to Japan or the 20th century. They are found wherever power is concentrated, and where technical achievement is valued above ethical restraint. The story of ping-pong is a case study in how bureaucratic logic and scientific ambition can merge, creating a climate where atrocity is not only possible, but routine. In the end, it was not a single doctrine or motto that enabled the horrors of Unit 731, but a collective willingness to accept suffering as the price of progress, and to let the machinery of the system run without question. August 1945 brought a new kind of urgency to ping-pong. As news of Japan's defeat swept through Manchuria, Dr. Shiro Ishii issued his final orders. Staff moved quickly through the compound, feeding stacks of laboratory notebooks and tissue samples into roaring fires. Incinerators ran day and night. Glass slides, surgical instruments, and specimen jars were smashed or vanished into hastily dug pits. The main complex, once a fortress of secrecy, was stripped bare, then rigged with explosives. In the span of days, Unit 731's physical traces disappeared, leaving behind only scorched earth and silent mass graves. Witnesses later described the chaos. Prisoners were executed by the dozens, their bodies buried in the fields outside the gates. Guards and doctors burned records, smashed equipment, and doused buildings with gasoline. The goal was absolute erasure. Soviet troops arrived in Harbin to find little more than rubble and the stench of burned chemicals. Official reports from Allied investigators confirmed that nearly all written evidence, experiment logs, subject lists, and autopsy reports had been destroyed or spirited away by Ishii's closest aides. While the world focused on Tokyo and the Nuremberg trials, a quieter negotiation began in occupied Japan. United States Army intelligence, recognizing the potential value of Unit 731 research, dispatched Lieutenant Colonel Murray Sanders to interrogate Ishii and his surviving colleagues. The Americans wanted every scrap of biological warfare data, frostbite protocols, weapon designs, and infection studies. In exchange, they offered something Ishii could not buy: immunity from prosecution. The terms were hammered out in a series of secret meetings in Tokyo through 1946 and 1947. Declassified War Department cables reveal the calculation. One memo, signed by Major Arvo Thompson, stated that the value of the data was of such importance to national security as to justify the immunity from prosecution of Japanese involved. General MacArthur's headquarters approved the arrangement, instructing investigators to keep all information top secret and avoid any evidence that might be used in war crimes trials. No public record, no trial, no reckoning. Ishii and his senior staff surrendered their findings to United States officers, delivering boxes of surviving reports and technical diagrams. In return, they walked free. The Soviets, arriving too late to capture Ishii, tried several lower-ranking officers at the Khabarovsk trials, but the main architects of Unit 731 experiments faced no charges in Japan or the United States. The Immunity Pact was never announced. For decades, its details remained buried in classified files, shielded by national security priorities and the early winds of the Cold War. The destruction of evidence and the immunity deal were not just acts of concealment. They were a final, chilling exchange: knowledge for justice, secrecy for accountability. The scientists, who had reduced life to a column of data points, now saw their own fates decided by a similar logic: utility above morality, expedience above truth. Justice after Unit 731 never reached those who designed its horrors. In the winter of 1949, the Soviet Union held the Khabarovsk war crimes trials, bringing 12 Japanese officers and scientists before a military tribunal. Testimony filled hundreds of pages: accounts of frostbite experiments, plague bombs, and the systematic killing of prisoners. The court sentenced several to hard labor, but the architects of the program, including Shiro Ishii, were absent. In Tokyo and Washington, their names were quietly erased from the record. For the victims and their families, the promise of justice faded into silence. In Harbin, the former grounds of Unit 731 stood empty for decades. Local farmers and construction crews unearthed bones, shattered glass, and rusted surgical tools. Survivors and their descendants began to collect what remained: names, photographs, fragments of clothing, and recorded oral histories that had been whispered in secret for years. The work of remembrance grew slowly, often in the face of official denial and social stigma. In the late 1980s, Chinese historians and activists pressed for a public reckoning. Their efforts led to the creation of the Unit 731 Museum, which opened its doors in Harbin in 1985. The museum archives hold thousands of documents and personal testimonies, many donated by families who lost relatives to the experiments. Inside the museum, glass cases display the tools of the laboratory: thermometers, syringes, and notebooks filled with data. Along the walls, photographs of victims stare back at visitors, restoring faces and stories to those once dismissed as logs. Survivor accounts recorded in Mandarin and Japanese describe the pain of frostbite, the terror of selection, and the struggle to rebuild lives after release. Some families have assembled their own memorials, placing stones and paper offerings near the ruins of the Pingfang compound. Others attend annual ceremonies, reading the names of the dead aloud in a ritual of reclamation. Historians and psychologists continue to study the legacy of Unit 731, seeking to understand how ordinary men became agents of atrocity. Their research draws on museum archives, trial records, and the words of survivors. The work is ongoing, shaped by a commitment to restoring humanity to the victims and confronting the moral void left by impunity. Today, the memory of Unit 731 endures not only in court transcripts or academic studies, but in the voices of those who refuse to let the past be buried. In Harbin, each name recovered from the darkness is a small act of justice, a reminder that the human cost of science without conscience cannot be erased. Today, Unit 731's horrors remain largely unpunished, with much of Ishii's research hidden from public view. As science and state power intertwine ever more closely, the lesson is clear. Without moral restraint, intellect becomes a weapon. The boundary between discovery and atrocity is thinner than we think. To defend our humanity, questioning authority and remembering the cost of silence is never optional. Share your thoughts below and keep the conversation alive.